Her name was Penelope Murray, though no one called her that. Everyone said Penny. Small. Forgettable. Pocket change. She was 23, had lost 80% of her hearing to an explosion at age 8, the same blast that took her father from the world entirely. Since then, she had learned to read lips the way other people read books. Fluently. Silently. Completely. She worked nights at the Ashford Hotel, Boston's most exclusive address, pushing her cart through corridors full of men who never once looked at her face. Men with money. Men with power. Men who looked through the girl in the gray uniform like she was just another piece of furniture in the room. She preferred it that way. Invisible was safe. Invisible was survival. Until the night Penelope Murray looked through a soundproof window, and read 3 words that would pull her out of the shadows and straight into the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. It started the way most life-altering moments do, not with a dramatic sign from the universe, but with someone calling in sick. Rosa from the day shift had a fever. Penny needed the overtime. So on a Friday night in October, while Boston's elite arrived in black cars and silk gowns for the Ashford's annual charity gala, Penny pulled on her gray uniform, clipped her cracked hearing aid into place, and took the service elevator to the VIP floor. She wasn't supposed to be there. She almost wasn't. The VIP corridor was hushed and cold, all marble and muted gold lighting, the kind of hallway that whispered you don't belong here with every step. Penny kept her eyes forward, her cartwheels quiet. She knew how to move through expensive spaces without disturbing them, like a ghost with a mop. She was halfway down the hall when the wall moved. Not the wall, men. 3 of them, dark suits, earpieces, moving fast and filling the entire corridor like a tide of controlled violence. The one in front didn't slow down. His hand clamped around Penny's arm and yanked, hard, careless, the way you'd shove a piece of furniture out of a doorway. She stumbled into the wall. Her cart rattled. Her shoulder screamed. Out of the way, he muttered, loud enough that she caught the words even through her broken aid. She pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering, and that's when she saw him. Behind the wall of muscle, walking like the floor belonged to him, because it did, was a man who didn't need bodyguards to look lethal. Tall. Well over 6 feet. Dark auburn hair cut close. Jaw carved from granite, shadowed with stubble. A charcoal suit that strained across shoulders built for violence, not boardrooms. And eyes, green eyes, sharp and cold, the kind that came with a warning label even people who couldn't read knew to heed. He was already past her. And then he stopped. His head turned. Slowly. Those green eyes found her face, and held. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. But the weight of that gaze pressed against Penny's chest like a warm, heavy hand. He wasn't looking through her. He wasn't looking past her. He was looking at her, fully, completely, the way almost no one ever had in her 23 years on this earth. Then he spoke to the bodyguard, quiet, final, without ever breaking eye contact with her. Don't be rough with her. 3 words. The bodyguard stiffened. Rowan Doyle turned and kept walking, and the corridor swallowed him whole. Penny stood there, her shoulder aching, her heart doing something unfamiliar and uninvited. In all her years of being shoved aside, dismissed, unseen, no one had ever said those 3 words on her behalf. Not once. She filed it away somewhere she didn't examine too closely, and got back to work. 30 minutes later, Penelope Murray was wiping the glass wall outside Conference Room C when her whole life changed. 2 men sat inside. Soundproof glass between them and her. Even with her aid cranked to full power, she wouldn't catch a syllable through that barrier. But Penny had been reading lips since she was 8 years old. Through distance, through noise, through glass, her eyes did what her ears couldn't. Had always done what her ears couldn't. Her cloth stopped moving. The man on the left had a thick neck and a cheap suit. His lips moved fast and sloppy, easy to read. She caught the words without effort, the way you catch a ball thrown directly at your face. The balcony entrance. 10:15. 2 shooters. The man on the right leaned forward, thinner, sharper, younger. His mouth formed words she would never forget. Boss says it's clean. Doyle won't see it coming. The cloth dropped from her hand. Doyle. The man from the corridor. The man with the green eyes who had said don't be rough with her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at the clock on the wall. 10:01 p.m. 14 minutes. She ran. She made it to the stairwell before she froze. Through the window, she could see the security desk below. And standing right there, laughing, easy, comfortable, was the thick-necked man from the conference room. The one with the sloppy lips and the cheap suit and the plan to kill someone in 13 minutes. He was shaking hands with the head of hotel security. Old friends. Warm smiles. A clap on the shoulder. Penny's mouth went dry. There was no safe door in this building. She turned around, walked the other way, fast, controlled, heart slamming against her ribs with a rhythm she could actually feel because the world had gone quiet and her blood was the loudest thing left. No security. No police she could reach in time. No one who would believe the invisible girl in the gray uniform when she pointed at powerful men and said murder. They never believed the invisible girl. She knew that. Had always known that. 15 years ago, one word, one single word spoken in time, could have saved her father from the blast that took him. Instead, the world had stayed silent. And Ian Murray had died, and taken most of his daughter's hearing along with him. Penny had learned to live in that silence. She had never learned to live with herself for it. She looked at the clock. 10:05 p.m. 10 minutes. She would not become that silence again. She grabbed an empty tray from a service cart and walked through the ballroom doors like she belonged there. The room hit her like a wave. 400 people in silk and tuxedos. Her hearing aid turning the crowd into a distorted roar, music, laughter, glass, all crushed together into something useless. In rooms like this, her ears were worthless. She switched the aid off and trusted her eyes. Dozens of conversations scrolled across her vision as she scanned the room face by face, mouth by mouth. Wonderful party. Love the orchestra. The lobster is divine. She moved faster. Pushed through bodies. Scanned the east wall, the bar, the entrance. And then her gaze snagged on a marble column and stopped. He was leaning against it. One hand in his pocket, the other holding a whiskey he hadn't touched. His head was tilted toward a silver-haired man beside him, nodding, listening, performing ease, but his eyes weren't listening. His eyes were doing exactly what hers were. Scanning mouths. Reading exits. Cataloging threats. A man who looked relaxed to everyone else but was coiled tight underneath, alert in the way of someone who had survived by never truly resting. She recognized it because she did the same thing every single day of her life. Penny crossed the room. Her heart hammered so loud she swore she could feel it in her damaged ears. When she reached him, she did something no cleaning girl should ever do to the most dangerous man in Boston. She touched his arm. His head turned. Slow. Those green eyes dropped to her hand on his sleeve, then climbed to her face. Recognition flickered. The girl from the corridor. He saw everything at once, the tremor she was trying to hide, the fear she couldn't control, the slight shake in her hand against his arm. Something shifted in the air between them, cold and electric. Mr. Doyle. Her voice cracked on his name. She saw his eyes track the sound. You need to leave this room right now. She glanced at the clock on the far wall. 7 minutes. There are 2 men planning to kill you at 10:15, and your head of security might be one of them. He didn't blink. He didn't laugh. He didn't reach for his phone to call someone, didn't wave her off, didn't do any of the things a reasonable person would do when a hotel maid grabbed their arm and said those words at a charity gala. He went still. Something about the way she said it, no hysteria, no begging, no performance. Just fact. Like she was reading him a weather report about a storm that was already at the door. His eyes dropped to her lips. Not the way men usually looked at a woman's lips. He was reading her, the way she read everyone else. Matching the movement of her mouth to the words, confirming every syllable. Who are you? His mouth shaped each word with careful precision. No waste. She read them without effort. Penelope Murray. I clean your hotel. Something cracked behind his eyes. She didn't understand it then, why her last name made a man like Rowan Doyle flinch. She was too focused on the clock, on the minutes ticking past, on the shooters positioned somewhere above them. His hand found her elbow. Firm. Warm. Not optional. The contact jolted through her like electricity. Come with me, Penelope. Now. Nobody called her that. Everyone said penny, small, forgettable, pocket change. But from his lips, her full name sounded like a door opening into a room she hadn't known existed. She went with him. And the clock on the wall read 10:11 when the first bullet shattered the champagne fountain. The champagne fountain exploded in a cascade of crystal and light. Penny didn't hear it. She saw it, the glass erupting outward, light refracting into 1,000 cold pieces, the fountain collapsing in on itself like a beautiful thing deciding all at once to fall apart. And then Rowan's hand clamped around her wrist, and the world tilted sideways. He pulled her down, fast, controlled, no hesitation, and covered her body with his before her brain could process what was happening. His full weight pressed her into the cold marble floor. One forearm braced beside her head. The other reached for something at his back. She felt every inch of him, 6'2" of muscle and bone and coiled violence, all of it positioned between her body and whatever was tearing the ballroom apart. His face was 3 inches from hers. Close enough to see the flecks of gold buried in the green of his eyes. Close enough to smell him, tobacco and something darker, the same scent from the corridor earlier, now wrapped around her like a warning she didn't want to heed. His lips moved. Deliberate. Each word shaped with careful precision. Don't be scared. I'm here. Cover your ears. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Just looked at him, steady, unblinking, with the kind of calm that had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with the fact that she couldn't hear the gunfire. She couldn't hear the screaming. The chaos tearing through the room around them was happening in perfect, terrifying silence. His eyes narrowed, just barely. A fraction of a second, barely enough for anyone to catch. But she caught it. The exact moment realization clicked into place behind those cold green eyes. She wasn't hearing him. She was reading him. Something passed across his face that she didn't have a name for. He held her gaze while his hand came up with a gun, sleek black metal, pulled from the holster at his spine, and fired twice over her shoulder without looking away from her eyes. She felt the recoil through his chest pressed against hers. Felt every muscle in his body contract and release. She smelled the sharp, acrid bite of gunpowder mixing with his cologne. Her world was silent. His was deafening. And somewhere between those two realities, between her stillness and his violence, something locked into place that neither of them had a word for yet. Men appeared from everywhere. She felt the vibrations through the marble, boots, heavy and fast, before she saw them. Rowan's head turned slightly, still covering her, his gaze tracking something she couldn't follow. A younger man appeared in her peripheral vision. Dark hair, blood on his sleeve, eyes that had seen too much and learned to keep moving anyway. His mouth moved fast. She caught fragments. Boss, exit's clear. 2 down. We need to move. Rowan didn't answer right away. He was still looking at her. 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough that the other man shifted his weight, glanced between them, and frowned with the specific kind of discomfort that came from watching your boss do something he'd never done before. Something flickered across Rowan's face. Not quite a smile, too sharp for that. But his mouth curved, just barely, at one corner. Like a man who had just discovered a complication he hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure if it was a problem or something else entirely. Then he moved. One hand slid to her waist, firm and decisive, and he lifted her off the floor like she weighed nothing. She was in his arms before her brain caught up, one arm under her knees, the other locked around her ribs, carrying her through the wreckage of overturned tables and shattered glass. "Put me down," she started to say. His eyes cut to hers. The words died. He was already walking fast, his heartbeat pressed against her shoulder, slower than hers, steadier than any heartbeat had a right to be in the middle of a shooting, a man so familiar with violence that it had stopped rattling him somewhere along the way. The night air hit her face first, cold and sharp. Then the leather interior of a sleek black car. He set her down on the back seat, slid in beside her, and the door shut with a sound she couldn't hear but felt in her bones. The car was already moving. "Where are you taking me?" She heard herself say the words too loud. Saw him glance at her hearing aid, still off from the ballroom. She reached up and turned it on. His lips moved slowly, deliberately, shaped for her eyes as much as her ears. "Somewhere safe. Until I know who sent those men. I need to go home. My sister is there. She's 17 and she's alone and I have to." "You're not going home." Not cruel. Not sharp. Just certain, the voice of a man who had made a decision and was no longer entertaining alternatives. "Not tonight." "Am I in danger?" Her voice wavered. She hated herself for it. I just work at your hotel." His gaze stayed level. Unblinking. "You became part of this the moment you walked into that ballroom and put yourself between me and a bullet." She opened her mouth. He spoke before she could. "You're coming with me. You're under my protection now." The words landed like a verdict. "I didn't ask for your protection," she said. "You saved my life." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing beneath the sharp line of his jaw. "That makes you a target. The men who want me dead saw your face. They know you warned me. They won't stop until you're gone." The bottom dropped out of her stomach. Nora. Her 17-year-old sister, the only family she had left since their mother's heart gave out 2 years ago. Home alone. Probably in bed with her headphones on, completely unaware that her big sister had just accidentally inserted herself into the middle of a mob assassination and was currently riding through Boston in an armored car. Penny's face changed. She watched Rowan watch it happen, the color leaving her cheeks, her shoulders locking, her breathing going jagged in the quiet way that was somehow worse than screaming. "My sister," she said. Her voice cracked. "If they know my face." He didn't let her finish. He turned to the front seat, and she read his lips as he spoke to the man driving. "Get the address. Send men to bring her here. Tell her she's safe." Something released in Penny's chest, then immediately tightened again, because she was sitting in an armored car belonging to Boston's most powerful crime figure, and the fact that his instructions about her teenage sister felt reassuring meant that her sense of danger had been completely recalibrated in the last 20 minutes. That was when she saw the blood. Dark, wet, spreading slowly through the white fabric of his shirt above his left shoulder. She'd missed it in the chaos. He'd shown no sign of it. Hadn't slowed down, hadn't winced, hadn't mentioned it once through any of it. "You're hurt." He glanced down at the blood like he'd genuinely forgotten it was there. Then back at her. His expression didn't shift. Just grazed. Her hand moved before she could stop it, reaching toward the dark stain spreading across his shoulder. He caught her wrist. "Don't." His grip was firm but not unkind. He held her wrist for one beat, two, and then released it slowly, like he was returning something borrowed. She understood. His blood. His business. His pain to keep. She kept looking at his shoulder anyway. The car descended. Concrete swallowed the night. The air changed, colder, older, closer, and Penny felt the shift before she saw the iron gate. Armed men stood guard on both sides. Beyond the gate, rising against the Boston skyline, was a mansion built from stone and history and secrets. Old money and new danger, all housed in the same walls. The car rolled through. The underground garage smelled of oil and stone and metal. An elevator waited at the far end, unmarked, guarded, old steel reinforced with new technology. Rowan pressed his thumb to the panel. The doors closed. They rode up in silence. Penny studied him in the small, lit space. The straight line of his shoulders despite the wound. The controlled stillness of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. The way he kept glancing at her, quick, careful assessments, like he was cataloging information she hadn't given him yet. The elevator opened. Dark wood. Low lighting. Thick walls. Men stationed at measured distances, all of them tracking her the moment she stepped into the corridor. Rowan turned toward her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him in the cool air, and his mouth formed the words clearly. "Under my roof, no one touches you." She believed him. She had no logical reason to. She had every logical reason not to. But she believed him the way you believed a storm shelter in the middle of a hurricane, not because it was comfortable, but because it was real. He took her upstairs. Wide steps, dark wood worn smooth at the center from decades of feet that had walked here before her. The second floor was a long hallway of closed doors. He stopped at the third one and pushed it open. "This room is yours. Your sister will be here soon." And then his voice, coming through her cracked hearing aid for the first time, hit her. It was unexpected. Everything about him was hard edges and controlled silences, but his voice had weight to it, low, deliberate, the kind of voice that filled a room without raising itself. It scraped through the broken amplifier in her ear like warm gravel over broken glass. The device screeched. The feedback hit her without warning, a spike of noise so sharp and sudden that her hand flew up, pressing hard against the casing. Her face twisted before she could school it. The pain was brief but real, the kind her nervous system had been dealing with since she was 8 years old. She reached up to click the aid off. And found Rowan's hand already there. Not grabbing. Not jerking it away. Just, there. 2 fingers resting lightly against the back of her hand on her own ear, pausing her mid-movement. She looked at him. He was watching her face with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not pity, she'd seen pity her whole life and knew it the way you knew an old enemy by sight. This was something else. Something quieter. Closer to the look of a person who had just learned something they hadn't expected to need to know. His hand dropped. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, small, cream-colored, handwritten. He placed it on the dresser beside her. She looked at it. A specialist's name. A clinic. Tomorrow, he'd written beneath it in careful, precise letters. If you want. 2 words. If you want. Not I'll take care of it or consider it done or any of the 100 things a man like him could have said to make it a transaction, a favor owed, a debt to collect. Just, if you want. Her choice. Her decision. Her ear, her life, her call. Penny looked at the card for a long time. Then she looked at him. He was already turning toward the door, giving her the room, the quiet, the space, as if he understood instinctively that someone who had survived by shrinking themselves needed to be given space rather than filled up with someone else's presence. Rowan. He stopped. She'd used his first name without thinking. Felt it only after it was out, the familiarity of it, the unexpected intimacy. His back stiffened, just slightly. He turned. "Why did you flinch?" she said. "When I told you my name." Murray. Why did Rowan Doyle flinch at the name of a hotel maid? The silence between them lasted 4 full seconds. Then his jaw tightened, and something moved behind his eyes, old and complicated and buried, and he said only, "Get some rest, Penelope." He pulled the door closed behind him. And Penelope Murray stood in a room that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't safe, with a name that apparently meant something to the most dangerous man in Boston, and she didn't know yet whether that was the most terrifying or the most important thing that had ever happened to her. There are two kinds of silences. The kind that exists when nothing is being said. And the kind that exists when everything is. Penelope Murray had lived inside the first kind for 15 years. Since the explosion. Since her father. Since the world went quiet and stayed that way, and she learned to read the spaces between words because the words themselves had been taken from her. Rowan Doyle had been living inside the second kind for much longer than that. She just didn't know it yet. But tonight, in a mansion full of armed men and old secrets and a wound he refused to let anyone tend, the two silences were about to collide. Penny couldn't sleep. The room was beautiful, all dark wood and deep cream linens and heavy curtains that blocked out the city entirely. The kind of room that was designed for peace and achieved it through sheer expensive effort. But her mind was running. Nora had arrived 2 hours ago, confused, sleepy, half annoyed, and then immediately unannoyed the moment she stepped inside the mansion and registered the chandeliers. She was tucked in the room next door now, and Penny had stood in the doorway watching her breathe for 5 full minutes before she could make herself walk away. Nora was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. So why couldn't she stop thinking about the card on the dresser? "If you want." She picked it up. Read the specialist's name again. Dr. Eileen Voss, Mass General. Advanced Hearing Restoration. Cochlear implants. Written in Rowan's handwriting, careful, precise, no flourishes. The same economy of language as his speech. How did he know that was even an option? How did he know what kind of help she might need? She had mentioned nothing beyond her name. Her job. The assassination plot. He had looked at her hearing aid in the car. He had noticed the cracked casing, the white-knuckled way she pressed it against her ear when the feedback hit, the careful deliberate way she positioned herself in rooms so that she could see as many lips as possible at once. He had noticed her. Not her uniform. Not her cart. Not her usefulness. Her. The unfamiliar weight of that knowledge settled in her chest like something warm and slightly alarming. She set the card down and went looking for water. She found him in the study on the first floor. The door was half open, amber light falling through the gap. She almost turned around. Should have turned around. She didn't. He was standing at the window with his jacket off and his shirt open at the collar, the wound on his shoulder wrapped now. Someone had finally convinced him to let it be tended, or he'd done it himself, and he was holding a glass of something dark he hadn't touched. He heard her. Or felt her. Or simply operated with a level of awareness that meant nothing moved through his house without his knowledge. He turned before she spoke. She signed, habit, reflex, then immediately caught herself. He didn't know ASL. Nobody ever did. But his eyes followed her hands with an attention that told her he was filing it away. "I couldn't sleep," she said. Then, because the question that had been circling since the corridor finally refused to stay in its corner, "Tell me about Murray." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he set down the glass and said, "Your father's name was Ian Murray." The floor shifted. She hadn't told him her father's name. She had told him nothing about her father. "He worked for me," Rowan said. 15 years ago. Before I was what I am now. I was 22 and running errands for men older than me and angrier than me, and your father drove cars, carried messages, kept his head down. He was honest. In a world that treated honesty like a disease. His voice was controlled. Careful. But there was something underneath it, something old and layered, like sediment at the bottom of deep water. He found out that the job he'd been hired for was a setup. Someone was going to use him as a distraction for a job he didn't know about. He was going to die for it. I warned him. Penny's breath stopped. He didn't run far enough. The explosion. October 14th, Penny had been 8 years old. She remembered the sound, a brief, enormous concussive crack, and then nothing. Just the underwater hum that had lived in her skull every day since. She remembered her father's hand. How it had been warm in the morning and then simply wasn't anymore. You were the one who warned him, she said. Not a question. Rowan's jaw tightened. I didn't warn him fast enough. 3 words. The exact weight of 15 years. She understood something then, why her name had made him flinch in the corridor. Why he had looked at her in the ballroom with something flickering behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Why the card on the dresser said if you want instead of I owe you this. He had owed her something for 15 years. He just hadn't known she existed. It wasn't your fault, she said. He looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd never heard but immediately recognized. You were 22, she continued. You tried. He died anyway. That's the whole story, isn't it? You tried. Sometimes people die anyway. You lost your hearing in that blast, he said. I lost my father in that blast. Her voice was steady. The hearing was just the damage around the edges. Something cracked in his expression. Not much. Barely visible. The fracture in the controlled surface of a man who had spent 15 years carrying a weight he'd stopped expecting anyone to help him set down. Penelope. Penny, she said automatically. He shook his head. Slow. Definitive. Not to me. The study was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the city, Boston kept moving, car horns and sirens and the particular restless noise of a place that never truly slept. In here, in the amber light, 2 people who had been living in different kinds of silence stood facing each other across a room that suddenly felt very small. Why did you do it? She asked. Tonight. You didn't know me. You covered me with your body in that ballroom, and you didn't know me. He was quiet for a beat. You walked into a room full of powerful men with a tray in your hand and no weapon but the truth, and you said it anyway. A pause. That deserves to be protected. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said the truest thing she'd said all night. No one has ever protected me. He crossed the room. Not fast. Not urgent. With the same controlled deliberateness he applied to everything, as if he had decided something and was simply executing the decision. He stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him again, the same gravity that had pressed against her chest in the corridor 12 hours ago. His hand came up, slow, watching her eyes for permission, giving her every opportunity to step back, and his fingers brushed the side of her face, gently tilting her chin up. She let him. He looked at her the way he had in the corridor. Fully. Completely. Not through her, not past her. At her. You're going to have to learn, he said, to let someone look. She exhaled. You too, she said quietly. And for the first time since she'd touched his arm in a ballroom full of gunfire and hope, for the first time since he'd said her name like it was something worth saying, Rowan Doyle smiled. Small. Real. The kind that cost something. They never did find who ordered the assassination. Not immediately. It took Rowan 3 weeks to dismantle the network from the inside, using information Penny had helped him piece together, fragments of conversations she had lip-read from across rooms, details she'd noticed from her invisible position in corridors and service hallways. The things no one thought the cleaning girl was watching. Turns out, the invisible girl had been watching everything. Nora enrolled in college that spring. Penny left the hotel. She started working with Rowan, not in violence, not in any of the corners of his world that still operated in shadow, but in the quiet spaces between. Reading rooms he couldn't read. Watching mouths he couldn't watch. Being the eyes in the places where his name made people careful. Being seen. Dr. Voss scheduled the surgery for May. The morning before, Rowan sat beside her bed in the sterile white of the pre-op room, his hand over hers on the railing, and she studied his lips in the careful way she always had, but differently now. Now she was also learning the lines around his eyes. The way he held his breath when he was worried but didn't want her to know. The particular stillness of a man who had spent 15 years being the most dangerous person in any room and had only recently discovered there was something in this world he was afraid to lose. "I might be able to hear your voice properly," she said. "After. I know. What if you sound terrible?" He raised an eyebrow. "What if you finally hear it and decide I'm Penelope?" She stopped. He said her name the way he always said it. Like a door opening. "Whatever you hear," he said, "I'm still going to be the man who thinks your silence is the bravest thing he's ever witnessed." She held his gaze. And somewhere in the space between her silence and his words, Penelope Murray understood for the first time what it felt like to be fully, completely, irreversibly known. And that, friends, is the story of the girl who couldn't hear the world, and the man who finally made it worth listening to. If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that ballroom, or felt something in your chest when he said, "Not to me," then you already know why we tell stories like this. Because in the end, it was never really about a deaf girl and a crime lord. It was about two people who had been invisible for different reasons, and what happened when they finally looked at each other. Hit the subscribe button if you want more stories that make you feel like this. Drop a comment, tell us, which moment hit you hardest? Was it the corridor? The ballroom? The study? The card that said "if you want"? We read every single one. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded today that being seen is not a luxury, it's the whole point. The life lesson. Silence is not the absence of courage. Sometimes, it is courage's purest form, the decision to act without applause, without recognition, without anyone watching. Penny warned a dangerous man not because she would be rewarded, but because she remembered what it cost her father when no one did. Real bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing inside the fear, quietly, when no one is looking. And real love, the kind worth having, is not found in grand gestures. It is found in the moment someone finally looks at you fully and completely and does not look away. You deserve to be that seen. Don't settle for being pocket change in someone else's world. You are always someone's full name.